Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Wonderful Wednesdays with Wendy Wojcicki. I am Wendy Wojcicki, your host, and I serve as the Parent Connector at Mission Empower. Mission Empower is Erie's Community Parent Resource Center. We are federally funded and a nonprofit. And I would like to say real quickly, thank you, Erie, for another wonderful Erie Gives Day and all of your donations. They help us so much with our programming, with our youth and vision, and giving them opportunities to go out in the community and do good. So today I have somebody very near and dear to my heart on. It's Mr. Pitrone. Hello. Hello. He actually was, in fact, my daughter's teacher, and he is a wonderful individual that believes wholeheartedly in the growth mindset, which is a phenomenal way to teach children through allowing them the grace to make mistakes that we learn through discovering, exploring, and making mistakes. But that's not why he's here. He also is with the Kinship Caregivers Network and has a wonderful connection with grandparents and GrandStories. And I guess we'll start at the beginning. So when my daughter had Mr. Pitrone as a teacher, he was learning or going for his doctorate.
Yes.
At Pitt.
Yes.
And how many years total did it take you to do this?
So from 2016 and just about 4 years.
Wow.
By the time I defended my dissertation and got the diploma.
Wow. So now we can call you Dr. Pitrone? Yes?
Sure.
I like it, Dr. Pitrone. So as I sit here with Jessica, our outreach coordinator from Mission Empower as well, her child also got to have Mr. Pitrone as an instructor, and we both cannot say enough positive things about him. So while he was at Pitt working on this doctorate, your focus was on what at Pitt?
My focus was concentrated on a program called Social and Comparative Analysis and Education. So basically what that means is, where are the strengths within our societies, within our communities and schools? Where are the gaps? Where do we need to bridge those gaps, between the different sectors within a community and within a community school? So that's where that's sort of where I fell at the University of Pittsburgh. While I was planning what I wanted to conduct a study or conduct some research on, I noticed that at the school I teach in Union City, we had a lot of grandparents that were raising their grandchildren. So I decided this is a great opportunity for me to decide upon a research topic, and so I did, and the research topic became studying the journeys of grand families and specifically the grandparent caregivers who are raising their grandchildren. And by the way, some great grandparent caregivers that are raising their grandchildren.
Right. So when you decided on that topic and you brought that to your professors, what did they think initially? Because that's I would have never thought to do a research project on that personally.
Right. Well, that's a great question. A lot of, and not just my professors at Pitt, even my own family, when I talk to my own family members about my new passion project, the demographic known as grand families, or these people that are raising their grandchildren, that sort of those folks sort of fly under the radar for a number of reasons. A lot of people just never really thought of grandparents that would adopt their grandchildren, or even if they don't have full adoption, they have what we call school guardianship of their grandchildren. So, there was a little bit of a learning curve, I guess, for myself. Well, a huge learning curve for myself, but a bit of a learning curve for the people that were interested in me and wanted to know what I was doing, while at Pitt.
Yes, I had no idea either. I was taking my FACT classes for OCY, for our foster adoption kinship, and there was a large number of kinship caregivers. And so when you mentioned that was your topic, I thought, oh, that makes so much sense, because in that Erie County setting when we were taking those classes, there was definitely a large population present. So you gave your professors what you wanted to do your research on, and then what was your next step?
Well, I suppose my next step was to get approval from my advisor, Dr. Maureen McClure at the university. She knew right away how passionate I was about to get with these people, and she said, Andy, she asked me, why are you the first student that I've ever had that decided to study grandparent caregivers, or even non-traditional families, to this level? And I told her, I said, back in, I think it was the 2015, maybe 2016 school year, I said, I noticed early on that about a quarter of the students in my classroom, my homeroom class, were being raised by grandparent caregivers. So that was about 5 students that were being, 5 different kids that were being raised by their grandparents or great grandparents. And it hit me. So I had to, I had to gain approval from the university. I had to gain approval from some of the other professors that became members of my dissertation committee. So basically I had to prove to them that grandparent caregivers are a worthwhile group of people to hear from, to learn from, and not only that, but what can we do to perhaps improve their experiences in public schools.
Right. So I imagine that took some time, because you had to go ahead and obviously you're doing your doctorate. You had to go ahead and prove what it was that you were trying to figure out as far as that goes. What is, so you got the approval.
Yes.
What was the next step? So where did you go next? Because all the connecting the dots are very important.
So, this evolution that I have been on, as you mentioned, brought me to the Kinship Caregivers Network of Northwestern Pennsylvania. And if you're interested, the Kinship Caregivers Network is on Facebook. You can follow our group. Myself, Kimberly Beers from Early Connections here in Erie County, Heather Brooks from the Union City Family Support Center. We've all been there for a few years now with the Kinship Caregivers Network. And through the Kinship Caregivers Network, I was able to widen my net and meet many more grand families than in a short period of time than I ever would have if I wasn't involved with the Kinship Caregivers Network. Before COVID-19, we held 4 different picnics or just meetups, I guess, that all of our kinship families that we have on our files were invited to. We like to have a few of them in the southern part of the county, and then a few here in Erie. And basically, those were just opportunities for grand families to, and if they didn't want to bring their grandchildren, we would just get the grandparent caregivers for them to come network with other grandparent caregivers. Everyone loves to find someone else that has gone through something that they have gone through, especially if it's difficult and traumatic. And the grandparent caregivers that would show up at these events that we would put on, they became their own circle. And the thing with grandparent caregiving that I've learned is and research proves this, in addition to what I've learned just through my own relationships with grandparent caregivers, often the context of grandparent caregiving itself pushes other family members and other people within their social circle away because of the time constraints that are all of a sudden thrust on, the grandparent caregivers. You know, occasionally there are differences of opinion within the families, within social groups. So, you know, many times the grandparent caregivers, they take on this tremendous superhero role, and then they lose some of their family.
Right.
They lose some of their social circle. They gain a family, they gain a little bit of a social circle back through the Kinship Caregivers Network. And it's just it's a nice resource to have here in Erie County. We hear from people that are in the process of becoming grandparent caregivers, that, you know, maybe they're in the process of adoption, you know, adopting one or more of their grandchildren. And we hear from them, and they ask us, you know, they'll reach out through Facebook, or they'll call Kim or myself, and they'll ask, you know, what can I do? There are a lot of resources, but I don't know where to begin.
Right.
So we sort of help clear the path for them. Kind of like, you know, I living here in Erie, I think of a snow blower or a snowplow. You know, we clear the way and sort of make their transition a little bit smoother. And in the process, we learn so much from every grand family that we come in contact with and become friends with.
Do you help with any of the legalities of those processes?
You know, no, I don't. I'm a third grade school teacher.
Yeah, I'm not the practical one. You know, we got to stay away from that.
No, but we have people on the Kinship Caregiver Committee that work at the Erie Family Center, people that work at Bethesda that also volunteer their time on the committee, and they are much more adept at the legalities of it. Interestingly, though, you know, this summer I've been working with a woman who I grew up with, and she reached out and she said, I noticed you do a lot of stuff with grandparent caregivers. I'm about to become a grandparent caregiver. Can you help me? And we hadn't talked in 20 some years. So we've become like super close friends this summer, just, you know, and you know, I tell, you know, anyone that asks, you know, about the legalities, I tell them, I don't know the answer just yet, but I know people that can find you the answer, and that's what we'll do. And that's what I did with this this friend, you know, that reconnected. And there are people that are on our committee that can help us, and if they can help us, there's always a next level to turn to, another person, another door to open.
That's awesome. So you are in with the Kinship Caregivers Network.
Forever.
So you're working on your doctorate. What was the data that you were searching for that you were basing that doctorate on? So where did it take you to next? So you're in there, and now you have access to all these families in Erie County. So then what were you looking for? What were you searching for?
Well, I mean, I recruited grandparent caregivers that would like to take part in, you know, that wanted to take part in this research study. So I went far and wide to find grandparent caregivers that would be willing to sit down with me and basically open up their lives for 2 or 3 what we call phenomenological interviews, meaning, you know, you've experienced this phenomenon in your life, and it's different than most people that I come in contact with as a 3rd grade teacher. I want you to teach me. So once I was able to find people that were willing to do this, we set up two, like I said, 2 or 3 of these interviews a piece. And the information that I wanted to find was like reading a mystery novel, because the assumptions that I had in my head usually proved incorrect. So I learned that there are no such things as hard and fast truths in life, you know, in many cases, especially in the lives of grand families. I found that, well, I mean, if you want to get technical, I used a model developed by a man named Dr. Yuri Bronfenbrenner years and years ago, and he developed this model that that you could apply to any demographic, any family. He developed it to locate the sources of a child's influences, so that, you know, so starting from the middle of this model, if you think of like a bullseye, you know, the child would be at the middle. The closest, you know, part of the, you know, nearby this target would be his, you know, mom, dad, or mom and dad. And then it gradually went out to, you know, school influences, religious influences. So I adapted that model to grandparent caregivers. So at the center of my model were the grandparent caregivers. And I simply wanted to find out, after I, you know, spent a lot of time talking with the grandparent caregivers, I wanted to find out, so where on this model have you landed as during your journey? And, you know, are there some influences in the study group that I created? You know, are there some resources that seem to get more hits than others? And I found that religious influences were important to the majority of the grandparent caregivers that I spoke with. I found, surprisingly, I found that immediate family wasn't as touched upon, you know, within the grand family. And I think that goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, where, you know, oftentimes because of disagreements and, you know, time, the immediate family sort of backs away. So, you know, I found, first and foremost, I guess, to answer your question, that I was wrong.
Which is surprising, because you took it from a third grade teacher standpoint of the student. So you've seen those students, you know, as
you're right.
You're looking at it. So that's very interesting that once you studied the grandparents as a whole across wide county spread, that you were discovering these other things. That's fascinating.
And you know, and you know, if this was like a podcast confessional, I have to admit that when going back to 2015, 2016, whenever that was, where I discovered so many grand families in my own classroom, I immediately thought of the grand family from a deficit mindset. And I mean, shame on me, you know, for doing that. I thought, oh, geez, their lives must be just incredibly difficult and awful, and, you know, all these other things. And I found out, you know, through the work, that it's the exact opposite. In many cases, sure, they do have a lot of opportunities where they cry at night, but they've told me that, you know, having a grandchild, having the ability and the gift, many have said, the gift to reparent has given them new energy, and has given them some of their youth back, and has validated their wisdom. So, you know, I've discovered a tremendous asset in the grand families that we have here in Erie County, and I discovered that they are tremendously resilient, and they're able to teach a teacher like myself. They're able to teach school districts, you know, human resource people that make health policy. They're able to teach us so much about resiliency.
I can only imagine how blessed they felt to be heard by you, for you to have an interest, and for you to then let them be heard. And you're letting them be heard through your GrandStories.
Sure.
So how did that idea pop into your head? Because, you know, I can't wait to hear a couple of those.
So in 2018, I wanted to try my hand at podcasting, and I wanted to extend my advocacy for grandparent caregiving. And so I felt, well, I might as well give it a try. And I was interning at the time at the Union City Family Support Center. And I approached Dave Robinson from the Family Support Center, and Heather Brooks from the Support Center. And I asked them, would you mind allowing me to host an amateur podcast? And they said, sure, go for it. So fortunately, there was a high school intern that was working there, and he's a tech whiz, so he helped me through it. But basically, I just wanted to invite human services people to come in and share how they specifically could help grandparent caregivers. So the first people I invited were from the Kinship Caregivers Network.
Perfect.
Then I invited some grandparent caregivers from Union City, and we just sat down. And at first, I had questions that I wanted to ask, and within a short while, I realized to throw those questions away because my questions really didn't matter. They had a better story to tell than I had. So I just allowed their stories to evolve, and we branched out. One of the episodes involved a family from the northern part of Erie County, and they just talked about the precedents leading up to becoming grandparent caregivers. They talked about their journey through, as you mentioned, the adoption process. Mm-hmm. They talked about their journeys and oftentimes their struggles with school. And I heard this a lot, not only in the podcast but also in my studies at Pitt. A lot of grandparent caregivers have told me they just feel like they have no rights. Thankfully, that is beginning to change a little bit, and they are getting more rights. But I think maybe the song beneath their words is more so, instead of "we don't have rights," it's "we don't have the same seat at the table as other non-traditional caregivers, foster families." Mm-hmm. So that opened up a whole nother dialogue where we talked about well, what's it feel like when I'd ask, well, what does it feel like when you talk to your child's teacher about being a grandparent caregiver, and the stories they told me, they were similar to the stories that I would hear from traditional biological parents, yet they were completely different. And that's kind of confusing, but they truly were, because they were approaching their problem solving with the schools and with anything really, even finding healthcare. They were approaching the same problems that you as a mom.
Okay, so we're backing up a second, and we're going back to what do grandparent caregivers in our community, what are they looking for from us as far as support? What can we do to make them feel more part of our community, and how do we take care of these families? Sure.
So, the families, I think they want to be respected, but they don't want to have platitudes thrown upon them. Mm-hmm. They enjoy when, I guess, I hate to use the word traditional and non-traditional, but they enjoy being asked questions by younger parents. Mm-hmm. Because the grandparent caregivers, have a unique opportunity to reparent, and it kind of validates their wisdom. From what I've heard, from so many grandparent caregivers, it validates their wisdom and their experience when other parents come up to them and say, "Hey, what can you tell me about the baseball team in town, or the Little League? What could I expect? With Little League, what are the signups like? Or school? I'm going to my first parent-teacher conference." So this could be like a first-time parent who's nervous about going to a parent-teacher conference. Grandparent caregivers, for the most part, seem to love it when they are asked for their advice and their wisdom from their years of experience as parents. And I heard this time and time again, and I continue to when I do my Kinship Caregivers Network volunteerism. They'll say, with pride in their eyes, they'll say, "I can't believe that I helped my grandson's friend's mom or dad on a school project. And I say, well, of course you did. That's because, you're a superstar. You're a superhero grandparent caregiver. So they love, they love to be given opportunities to show that they still have it, and I've heard from so many grandparent caregivers that they actually, many of them get this resurgence of energy from time to time from the children that they're raising. They don't want handouts. They want empathy. They want acknowledgement, and they want people to also understand that when you first hear that someone's a grandparent caregiver, it's I think it may be some of our natural inclination to think or to assume that it's a temporary context. And the grandparent caregivers, they don't always look at it like that. They look at it as if, this is a life change that we are making, and we are going to see this through. We're going to raise our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. It's an adoption in many cases. Yeah. So I would think that the idea or the assumption that it's a short-term Band-Aid is probably insulting to them. Mm-hmm. So, just and treat them like parents. They're parents, and and teachers need to do that as well. I've heard from grandparent caregivers that have told me that maybe a teacher treats their child or the grandchild with kid gloves because they understand that there was a traumatic event that caused the grandparent caregiving situation to occur in the first place. Mm-hmm. They don't want that. They want teachers, they want people in the field of education to just treat their children like any other child, with their own unique special needs and strengths and all those other good things.
I am going to give a personal, sorry, Ms. Cammie, shout out to my favorite grandparent, and she has been instrumental in teaching my daughter all about bullying, about getting through school and what the other side of school looks like. And she's been absolutely instrumental in guiding me with her because of her knowledge. So sorry about that, I gave you a shout out. But she wears that badge very proudly. She does a phenomenal job with her kids. So your GrandStories, are they available for us to listen to, and how do we get to those? Sure.
The easiest way, I guess, would be just wherever you find your podcast, or you could type in GrandStories, in Google. It's just GrandStories.
And Grand is capitalized.
Podcast, yeah. Grand is capitalized. Just type in GrandStories podcast, and I think it's the first or second one that pops up. So I don't think anybody else is doing a podcast devoted to grandparents that are raising their grandchildren, grandchildren of school age. So yeah, you can just Google search GrandStories podcast, or wherever you get your podcast, as they say. What would be another option? And Facebook, you can always check in on the GrandStories Facebook page, and we're in the process of rebooting GrandStories. We only were able to do like 4 or 5 episodes, but this summer I've decided to reboot the podcast, and we don't have any new episodes. We're working on that right now, and hopefully by the end of the school year there'll be hopefully 9 new episodes, maybe once a month during the year back to school, a year in the life of a grandparent caregiver raising a school-age child during a pandemic.
That would be really cool, actually, because think about it. When I imagine there has to be lots of red tape, because depending on where you are with things and the legality of things, if you're just a grandparent raising your grandchildren and you don't have like the legal custody or the legal this, or if you're getting those supports, or how do you go about getting free lunches, and there's going to be a problem to get the lunches, and just trying to figure out who gets to enroll them in school. I can only imagine the plethora of problems that they could possibly face, and the tenacity they probably have to face them.
That's a great etched. I love the word tenacity. They are tenacious.
Yes,
they certainly are.
They have to be, because this is their second go, and they've already gone once. So I'm sure they've learned so much the first time around. And I can't wait to see some of these GrandStories myself. And what else do you have to tell us about that? So how are we wrapping this all up with a pretty bow? So you are now Dr. Pitrone.
Yes, I am.
With your passion.
And, thanks to my wife, Jen Pitrone, who I teach with in Union City. She, I don't know, for forever, she's been the rock, in our marriage. But during the whole process of getting my doctorate and branching out with my passion projects, she assumed even more of the foundational rock role. And we had some things, with some health issues in our families, and she was always there to just make sure that I stayed on the course as a teacher and as a student and as an advocate. So, thank you, Jen, for being there for me. But I guess to wrap up, a grandparent caregiver, a grandfather who was raising two of his grandchildren, that he and his wife adopted them. He asked me one day, Andy, do you do any rock climbing? And just out of the blue. And I said, no, I've never done any rock climbing. I said, occasionally me and Jen will walk on the trails, Lake Erie Bluffs or something like that, but no, never any rock climbing. And I said, why do you ask? and he said, and he got real serious. And he said, well, you know how you and I talk about grandparent caregiving a lot? And I said, yeah. He said, I want you to imagine putting on a backpack before you do some rock climbing. And then I want you to think about putting some rocks inside that backpack. And I want you to put 100 pounds of stones or rocks inside your backpack before you decide to climb that big hill. He said, that's what it's like being a grandparent caregiver. And then he said, and that's what I said, I didn't know.
What do you say to that?
Right, wow. And then he said, but you know what? Eventually you get to the top and you see that all of those rocks represent all of the success stories that you had along the way. And I gave the guy a hug.
Oh, I was too.
And he's not a hugger.
Oh, well, he earned it.
So it was a surprise. Right. It blew me away to think, it is difficult, but you wear those rocks as
a badge of honor.
Badge of honor, yeah. They said you get to look down, and it dawned on me, he was graduating. His grandson was graduating high school at the time, so that was his peak. That in his mind, as a grandfather caregiver, he got him to high school graduation, and he could celebrate.
That's awesome. That's a great way to wrap that up. Thank you so much for coming on and letting us know all about GrandStories and about the Kinship Caregivers Network.
Yes, thank you.
I am hoping that we have some grandparents we can send your way.
Please. That
can absolutely add to your stories, because I think it is very important. In America, we do not have the multicultural families underneath one roof that traditionally other people in Europe do. And so the whole thing fascinates me. I've learned so much already, and I'm just glad to have you in and have a talk about it.
And if I may just say, if there are grandfamilies that would like to reach out to myself or to the Kinship Caregivers Network, we everything will remain as confidential as you deserve and as you would like. I don't want people to think that if they reach out to me for resources, they have to appear on the podcast, because they don't. The Kinship Caregivers is a local community resource conduit.
Nonprofit?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Working on it.
Okay.
So we're there to help anonymously. And if we have a new grand family join the ranks, they'll get invited, hopefully one day once.
I was going to ask, are you still going to be having these meetups?
Post-COVID, no, not until it's safe to do so.
Have you tried them all on Zoom yet?
We have not done any.
It's hard because of the technology, and you're talking to grandparents, and there's that. I know I had to have extensive training with my family and grandparents on how to use Zoom. It was definitely a learning curve there. So, but that might be an option. For
sure. I like the idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it so much. So that is another episode of Wonderful Wednesdays with Wendy. Next week, we will be having Bethesda Lutheran on talking about their North Star counseling. So I hope to see you then. Thanks and have a great week. Bye.
See ya.